was an old song that my dad loved, and it went something like this. It said, "After I leave for worlds unknown over the borderline, never again on earth to roam, what will I leave behind? Will I be missed by those that I've loved, or have I been unkind? Have I been true to God above? What will I leave behind?" This is my prayer. O Lord, today, let me be wholly thine. And when I'm called from earth away, let heaven then be mine. Leave behind, yes, leave behind. What will I leave behind? After I leave for worlds unknown, what will I leave behind? There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. You keep reading in Ecclesiastes, you're going to find that there's a time to live, there's a time to die, there's a time to plant, there's a time to pluck that which was planted. And there's a time that you will have lived your life as a father. It just seemed like yesterday that my wife and I married, 1988. We had kids soon after. We have 4 kids. And the roles have changed. I can remember when they were home spanking them when they were small. I remember when the first one went to school around 1995. That Sunday night before they went to school, my wife cried. She said, "I don't have her at home anymore." When the second one, a couple of years later, went to school that Sunday night before, my wife cried. Now I don't have 2 of them at home anymore. It'd make me cry. I thought, stop. This is killing me too. Time's moving. Then the third one, Lily Parker, 1995. My wife cried. And the last one, Tex Autry. My wife, I remember her saying, "I have no kids at home." You realize those roles were changing fast, so fast, we couldn't stop it. What will you leave behind? We were almost past the spanking stage. Now we're watching them grow up. We started going to ball games in all those times. That's over. That ended this year. I went to my last track meet, my last ball game. I'm done. I figured it up 15, 20 years. I don't know how many years I was going. It was time. 3 of them are married. We got grandkids. Where did it go? And I can remember standing in the Valley Church of Christ around 1994. Joe and Ann Richardson were there. Ann pulled me aside because I had 2 little girls beside me, and she said, "We had that not long ago." She said, "I'm telling you, it's going to go by fast." I've never forgotten those words. What will you leave behind? What's your legacy going to be, fathers? Ephesians chapter 5. If you read chapter 4 of Ephesians, it gives you a great picture of what a Christian is and how the church works together. And it tells you how to live a life. It tells you not to lie, not to steal. Verse 32, he says, "Be ye kind-hearted one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another." He tells you the way you ought to be. Chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. Just keep reading them. We've been talking about chapter 6 today. Then he says in chapter 5 and verse 1, he says, "Be ye therefore followers of God as dear children." What does that mean? Be ye followers of God as dear children. You know what he's saying? Be ye followers of God as you are your father. As a child wants to be like his father. When I was a little boy, I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to farm. When he had a truck, I wanted to drive a truck. I wanted to dress like him, and I wanted to be like him. I was a follower of my dad as a child is. And he says that's the way we ought to be with Christ. As children want to be like their parents, be you followers of me. Why? After a while, when our kids see that long enough, they're going, "I want to be like Dad. Dad was like Christ. I want to be like Mom. Mom was a great godly woman." Verse 17. Wherefore, be not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. Understanding what the will of the Lord. I'm going to be an imitator of Christ. My children are going to want to be like me. And he said, that's why you ought to follow me. And as you're doing that, understand what the will of the Lord is. You know, that's the two things I take from that. You fill in all the gaps in Ephesians 3, 4, 5, and 6. You keep moving. He says, understand what the will of the Lord is. Chapter 6, he says, and fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. See, all that fits together. But the whole time, daddies, we're imitators of Christ, as flawed as we are. And we're understanding what the will of the Lord is. I had a guy helping me one time, and he was struggling. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, I just need to know what the will of the Lord is for me and my son. And I knew, because he hadn't had a dad. He had scars. And I said, you know what the will of the Lord is. And we'll get to it here in a minute, but I thought, you need to go to work. For him, that was what it was. Whose house is it? Whose house is it? We were growing up. My mom and dad had 5. I've got 4 sisters. I'm the next to the youngest. A lot of you know them. There were certain things that went on in my dad's house because it was his house. I'm going to tell you, dads, it's your house. You're leading the house. What goes on in your house? One thing that went on in our house, I just want you to understand how times changed. Let me tell you what went on in our house. When we were kids, you weren't allowed to wear shorts. I'm not asking you to raise hands. How many of you still practice that today? That was Daddy's rule. And one time, as I got older, I saw one of my sisters wearing shorts and she was going out, and I said, I'm telling Daddy. I said, you're not supposed to do that. And what goes on in our house? I'll tell you one more. It's not relevant so much. I know why Daddy did that. I know why my dad had that rule. I was growing up, my job was not to get the dishes, not to wash clothes. That was the sisters' jobs. You burn trash, you do the scraps, you help mow the yard. Not thinking, we raised our son that way, and we never really talked about it. But that's what went on. That's what we did. And I didn't find out until about 6 months ago that one of the sisters at church came to me and said, do you know when your son was 5 years old, he was at our house, and I said, everybody get your dishes. And your son, 5 years old, stood up and goes, I don't do that. And she wisely said, well, in this house you do. It's funny. I hadn't really given a lot of thought to that, but I did the same thing. What's going on in your houses? What's going on as far as discipline? How we discipline our kids? We've talked about that a little bit. Proverbs chapter 23 and verse number 13 and 14 says, withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with a rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with a rod and shalt deliver his soul from hell. My dad was a believer in that. I know when we were in school, talk about culture, talk about what went on at school, they were believers in that in the 1970s and 80s. On up till we graduated. I got licks when I was 18 years old. I had too many tardies. That was the rule. I don't know what everybody believes on that anymore. I know in my house growing up and in my house with my kids, we did that partly because that's what my dad did. My dad had a philosophy. He didn't whip you a lot. He told me one time years later, he said, you know, some people are thinking you ought to whip a kid for everything. This was way after I was grown, and I'm thinking, tell me about it. Tell me. Because, we towed the line. He said, well, you know, I don't remember but 2 whippings from my daddy. And I thought, well, I don't really remember but about 2 from you. He said, do you know why? And I said, no. He said, because I never wanted one. I thought, enough said. Enough said. I believe that. Families, do you talk about it? Do you have anything? Is there anything that you do that you're going to pass down? Because The legacy of what you're doing. We're talking about some big, meaty, heavy things, but there's some little things that you're going to be doing. Jameson was talking a while ago about work. If any provide, and this has been mentioned today, but if any provide, 1 Timothy 5:8, if any provide not for his own, and especially those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. I think he nailed it. And I'm going to tell you right now, as he's preaching, I've worked too much. Me and my dad probably worked a little too much sometimes. I believe that. I think it was a pretty good balance. My biggest fear that my daughters would marry son-in-laws that wouldn't work. That was real. And they do. They do. Got 3 great son-in-laws, and they work. If you read 1 Timothy 5 and you read what he's talking about their widows. And he says, the older widows, if there's some older widows in the church and people aren't taking care of them under certain circumstances, he says the church can help them. But then he says on the younger widows, no. He said they need to remarry. And he's saying, if any provides not for his own. He's talking about us even taking care maybe of some extended family. Guys, that's one of our roles. I grew up in a home, my mom helped my dad. My mom would work part-time at the post office. She was his secretary. She did a lot. My mom was a great woman, godly woman. Set a great example. But my dad set the example. He was the provider, if at all possible. And we honored and respected that tremendously. What's going on in your home? These little things can matter. How about alcohol? Somebody says, alcohol, that's been mentioned too today. Proverbs 21 says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. You know, my dad never told me, son, don't go out and drink tonight. We weren't a drinking family. My dad never said, if you take a drink, that's a sin. I never heard that. But we weren't a drinking family. And the people we were around were not drinkers. Now I had some kinfolk that were on my dad's, alcoholics. Really bad. Did some prison time. One time we're driving down the road and we were talking about certain situations with some of the extended family, and he said, there may not be anything wrong with a guy having a beer. He said, I don't. But he said, the problem that I've always seen is most people can't do that. That's about all we ever said, because everything else was me seeing what he had done. I talked to a guy not long ago, and I said, if you had us do over again, would you have taken that first drink? He said, no. And I said, why? And he said, because I wouldn't be in AA right now. Then he said, and there's no telling where I'd be right now if I hadn't made that choice. We can't control everything. We may not create environments that cause some of these things. Sometimes we just fall, and we'll get to that later. We need to think, what are we doing? Small, big, in between, what are we doing? He mentioned ball games a while ago. I'm not a big video game guy. One thing I worry about is that there's some of the young guys spending too much time playing video games early in the morning, late at night. They get married early in the morning, late at night. Some of them don't work. True? That worries me. That's easy for me to say because I don't have a problem with that. He mentioned ball games a while ago. A few years ago, our kids were starting to play ball at Gunner. And my wife said, I think Cassandra's going to play Little League basketball, whatever it was called. I said, I don't know that I want to be involved in that too much because I know how I am. I'm competitive, and I said, I don't want to be one of those parents. My dad was not one of those parents. My dad didn't make all my ball games. He tried. I'm telling you, he was making a living, and sometimes it just wasn't working out. My mom did. But as the kids grew older, we saw a little talent there. So I said, let's push it. So I started getting them and working with them. You know what happened? I was doing what I said I wasn't going to do. And we started playing ball. Every night when I'd come in, I'd say, let's go to the gym. We had goals of how many free throws. And I won't belabor this. We'll get a little quicker into the story. Let me tell you what happens. What's the end of the story? To get good, you had to start playing all summer. Oh, I know there's somebody in here that knows what I'm talking about in this bigger crowd. There's pressure put on you because those other kids that you're competing against are playing all summer, and the coaches at the public school know they're playing all summer, and you're not. So I said, let's play. We played Friday night. They'd have a game. Saturday. Then I was ticked off because they're playing Sundays. So I tried to change. I even called some people in the church in Oklahoma. I said, y'all have a league up there that don't play Sundays? No, there's no such thing. So we played, and I'm going to tell you what finally happened. I woke up one day, and I'm in a hotel room with the teams, and we're having communion, traveling. Somebody says, that's a good thing. It was the best I could do to justify it with my conscience. But we played, we had communion. And I told my wife later, I said, this is not good. I said, we're creating a bad atmosphere. I said, I got to stop. So I called the coach, and I said, we can't play anymore on Sundays. He said, that's fine, just be there Saturdays. Got a call the next Mondays. He goes, I need to find another post player. And I was mad. And I said, yes, you do. We were all out at the ranch working cattle, and I said, we're done. And I'm mad. I cannot believe that I let myself do that. You know, my dad never went to any of those games, never talked to me about what we were doing. But you know what I knew? Dad's not happy. My dad was not happy. That was his way of handling it. He just didn't say a whole lot because that was my judgment, and he let me kind of mess up. So I'm telling you, if you're here today and you're letting ball games run everything, you can't do all of that. You're setting a bad pattern. That pattern wasn't set for me. Church attendance. My dad, we'd work 6 days a week. Sunday was a no-no. That's just the way it was. That's what we did. That was the culture. It was his house. That's what we did. What do you do? We had the church over on Sundays. We'd visit. We'd have the preachers over when we had a gospel meeting. That's what we did. Do you think about those things? One time there was an elder there at Gunner, and I said, I can't have everybody over to my house. It's too small. And he goes, oh, come on. I said, okay. So I will do it. It was the best thing I ever did. It was small, but we could do it. Think about what you're doing every day. Don't be a quitter. One thing I can say about my dad, he was not a quitter. He didn't quit on life. When he got Parkinson's, he was not a quitter so much that I think us 5 kids thought he was invincible. Nothing bothers him. This don't even bother him. One day the doctor said, you know, depression's a big deal with it. He's going to fight depression. And I thought, my dad, he wasn't a quitter. One day I called him. He's sick. The medicine making him sick. And I said, aren't you tired of this? He said, son, he laughed. I don't have any choice. There's nothing I can do. He wasn't a quitter. That's my great-grandfather. Never knew him, but since I was born, I've heard the story. That was my dad's granddad. East of Gunner, a good ways. That man was born in the late 1800s. They had 4 or 5 kids. One of them was my granddad. When those boys and I think a girl were about probably 10 years old, we're talking 1915, 1914, he left them. Remember what we read a while ago about the widows? He left her a widow almost with 4 or 5 little kids in 1910, 1915. I'm telling you, my dad said it was real hard on those boys. He came back one time, about 10 years later. The boys were older. One of them saw him, and he was almost to the house, and he said, if you show up here, we're going to kill you. That's a quote. Don't come around here. Larry Bird talked about his dad was an alcoholic. His mom came home one day and said, I'm leaving you. His dad went and killed himself. He said, Dad was always a quitter to me. That's a big deal to a kid. My dad told me a story one time. He said, I was arguing with him. We were working. And I said, we can't do that. We can't do that. And he said, hold on. Now, his health was good. So he got up and he looked at me and he said, I want to tell you, and it's a nice way but firm. He goes, I'm going to tell you just what Max Shelton said, who had a place up the road. He was a rancher. He said, Max was working on a piece of machinery just like you and I are, and his hired hand kept telling him, Max, we can't do this. He said, I'm going to tell you just what Max told him. I've got to try. Now he said, I'm going to tell you what, we've got to try. And that was his attitude. And he lived it. Luke 21:19, in your patience possess ye your souls. Stay the course. Hosea 6, one of the versions, verse 3 says, let us press on to know the Lord. You ever pressed on to know something? You ever pushed to know something? It's the opposite of quitting. It's like when you're going to that ball game and you're late and you'll do anything to get there. You know what it's like to press on. Somebody already mentioned the narrow gate. Enter ye in at the skinny gate. Because wide is the gate, broad is the way that leads to destruction. Many there be which go in thereat. You ever try to get through a narrow gate? We do that every day. We bring farm equipment through little skinny gates. Drives me crazy. My first thing I'll tell my son is, why do people not plan? So we're driving around hitting posts because it's hard. Being a Christian's not easy. Being a dad's not easy. After these guys preached, honestly, I wasn't feeling so good. I felt good when I got here, but I got all things I got to work on. Stepping on our toes, horribly. How about the church? How about your marriage? You a quitter? I saw that in my mom and dad, not quitters. I could tell when things weren't well at home growing up. I never worried that they were going to bust up because I knew they didn't quit. How about the church? You quit the church? There was a time in the late 70s, early 80s, I was a kid. Talk about in your patience, possess you your soul, stay in the course, pressing on. That narrow gate, it's hard. My dad wasn't happy. I stayed out of that because I knew he wasn't happy. I remember him coming home. He didn't say anything in front of me, but without giving details, he was not a happy man with the congregation there. This went on for quite a while until one night, on a Wednesday night, everything got resolved. I never heard exactly what he never talked to me about it. But it was a big deal. We didn't leave. That's told me more than him telling me not to leave, because that was hard. We didn't leave. We didn't leave. What if we had left? You know how many of my family goes to church there at the Valley Church of Christ? How many descendants of my mom and dad? Most of them by far were not born. But we're there. It teaches you endurance. It teaches you that in patience you possess your souls. Let's stay the course. Maybe somebody's wrong. Let's stay the course. Some people change churches, and I don't mean in the church. I mean like people change socks. We want to grow at Gunner. And I look at some of the large churches, and I mean, those people are swapping churches. You know, that's not what I want. Show me. Dad, show me your faith. Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works. I will show thee my faith by my works. Matthew chapter 7. I'm studying for this. Verse 1 says, judge not that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. I know. What does this have to do with being a father? Stay with me. Why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or why wilt thou say to thy brother, hey, let me pull out a mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. You ever show somebody? I have people sometimes at Gunner go, some of the young guys or the young families will say, hey, what do you think about this? This is a problem. You know what my first answer is? If it's really a problem, get rid of it. Get rid of it. And I'm studying for this, and I've confessed it to church. I confess it to my wife. I will do this and this. Because if Fox News is ever on, I like, whoa. I get mad. I watch politics, and it's a hindrance. That's just one hindrance. I told my wife, I said, you know, in a good conscience, I honestly cannot keep telling people to get stuff away unless I do. So I told her, let's get rid of it. It's killing me. Because that's a habit formed that I go back to. Show somebody. Show somebody how to do something. I know dads are easy. That's like what I'm saying. It's easy to tell somebody, why don't you just do A, B, C, and D? But then when I turn around and look at myself, and I go, sometimes that's not so easy when we have bad habits. Show our children. Several years ago, Teresa and I were in a Farm Bureau convention, Young Farmers and Ranchers, probably 25 years ago. I believe we were in West Texas. They had a convention, and a man got up to speak from Nebraska. I'll never forget. You don't remember everything, but I remember his point. He said there was a family of young farmers, and this one family, a father and I think more than one son, worked together. And that's hard. You ever tried to work with your dad a lot? That can be difficult. As the story went on, he said, got to where the father and son wouldn't speak. So finally they parted ways. Then as time went on, they didn't speak. The son don't go to Thanksgiving anymore. A lot of bitterness. He don't go to Christmas. Finally, he severs all ties with his dad. And the guy goes, finally the dad passed away, and the son didn't go to the funeral. And then the next words is what made the chills come over, and in tears he said, and that's the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. You ever feel that way towards people? That's why sometimes we leave. Sometimes maybe why we leave a job, we leave church. We're angry, we're bitter, maybe sometimes justified. There was a guy at my house about a month ago. He runs cattle in Central Texas. I said, now you run cattle, and your brother, no, my brother does not, the older. I said, where's he at? He said, he's in Arkansas, coaching tennis. I said, he goes, well, he tried, but he goes, my dad was very, very hard 15 years ago. He said he's kind of tempered it a little. Show him. My kids, 10 years ago, my nephew, my dad would drive up on a gator. His health was not as good, or in a pickup. We would work cattle. We were baling hay. We were doing no telling what. But he was going to check on us during the day. And when he checked on us, he'd have a cooler full of Lipton teas. My kids were teenagers. And when he'd drive up, they'd go, hey, there's Granddad. I wonder if he's got some tea. He'd stop, get out, and he'd go, and they could tell you, hey, y'all want some tea? And everyone would run. They'd run from me. It was relief. My dad was relief. And then he would always say, hey, Grandma's got more. We got more. It was a peaceful thing. One day, a few years later, we're out working. The wheat's ready to harvest. We don't farm much. He had gotten an old combine. I mean, people were envious from everywhere because he had like a 55 John Deere combine. And it ran. And he cut our wheat. And it was ready. The wheat was already past ready. And I said, let's go get that grain cart and let's get this wheat cut. He said, I want to take my tractor. And I'm mad because his tractor was not running. I said, I don't want to take your tractor. He said, yeah, let's go get batteries. I thought there was no purpose at all other than to delay what we were doing. And I'm mad. I'm kind of ashamed to tell you because I thought I'm not losing this battle. Because my dad don't back down. Because I knew all along I got to back down. So I was going to let him know everything I thought, why this was the dumbest thing we could ever do. The wheat's ready, blah, 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 blah. I'm hollering, and he keeps arguing, and I raise my voice. And I said, I don't want to do that. And I'm mad. And he's in a John Deere Gator, and I'm looking down at him. And finally he reaches over, he grabs a tea, and he goes, hey, you want a tea? He said, we'll do it like you want to do it. And I said, now you want to know the honest truth? It was all I could do to not cry because the emotion just went from anger to shame. Why did he say that? He'd never done that. He would never let me push him around. He said, why don't we'll do that the way you want to do it. And in your mind, you're going, no, don't do that the way I want to do it. Not that big a deal. You know what he showed me? And it's hard. It's hard with my children. It's hard with my son. He showed me, you want to know the fruit of the Spirit? He showed me love. He didn't have to have his way. He showed me how to turn away wrath because he turned my wrath away in about 3 seconds from mad to shame. Peace, long-suffering, gentleness. He showed me all those things. Meekness. Woo! You back up chapter 5 and you read about the other things, revelings, fornication. I got to look at that and I realized, hey, those things are fast. I can go get drunk tonight. I can go commit fornication tonight. I can get mad tonight. But the love, the joy, the peace, the long-suffering, I can't just get that today. That takes a walk with the Lord. He says it's a fruit of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit gives us those things as we walk with the Lord. Show them. Your kids might be shocked sometimes if you actually showed them meekness, because it's a father-son relationship. It's where I tell you what to do. Show them. That did more for me than him telling me anything, for him to humble himself like that. James chapter 2. Lastly, James 2 in verse number 12 says, so speak and so do as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. For he shall have judgment without mercy on him that showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. So speak ye and so do as they that will be judged by the law of liberty. Mercy's hard. That verse is talking about I walk and I talk like I'm forgiven. And when I walk and I talk like I'm forgiven, mercy flows. Understanding forgiveness is hard. Luke chapter 15, I believe Jameson touched on that, or Michael. I won't go through it all. Do you realize Luke chapter 15 and verse number 1, the Pharisees and scribes are looking at Jesus going, look at him. He's eating with the crooks, the tax collectors, possibly the prostitutes. He's eating with them. Jesus looks at him and says, what man of you, if he has one sheep that's gone, don't leave the 99 and go get it. And then have a party when you get back. That's basically what he tells them. I saw a church sign the other day that said, it sounds crazy for somebody to leave the 99 after one unless you're that one. But that's the way Jesus is. Mercy's hard. Scribes, Pharisees had none. We're going to be like Jesus, right? We're going to imitate it. We're going to know what the will of the Lord is. We're going to teach that to our kids. Son comes, son leaves. Just like at 99 and the one's gone, the Father's watching. Full of mercy. My son let me know something. He went down to at their Christian school. They got down to something called, I cannot remember the name of it now, Passion. And I said, when you go, you're going to hear probably some things you don't agree with. You may hear some that you do. And he came back and he had one that he agreed with and he was really excited about. He sent me the video and I listened to it. He doesn't know this, but I almost just cried. I did cry when I listened to it. Because I thought, that's right. It was about the woman at the well. But the point when the guy came to the big part of the sermon that I thought, you are so right. Sometimes we set the bar way up here for our kids. I'm going to tell you, I've had that bar set for me before when I was playing ball and things. When I figured out I couldn't reach it, I'm not quite that. Man, I almost want to pull back. I think we got to be careful that we don't tell our kids, you're going to be the best preacher. You're going to be this. You are going to have the best marriage. You're married. Maybe things aren't going well. And you know what? It's going to be awesome. You're not going to do like we did. Instead, what we ought to tell them is, you're going to mess up. Right? They're not. You're going to mess up. I'm sure my daughters have messed up. They probably don't want me to know. I'm sure my son's messed up. He probably don't want me to know. Because you know how I know that? Because I know that I messed up, and most of it my mom and dad never knew. I messed up. You ever tell your kids, you know what, you're going to mess up? Someone says, I don't do that. What do they do when they do? All have sinned. There's going to come a day when we're all going to mess up. It may be pretty big. Your fault, my fault, nobody's fault. We're all going to mess up sometimes. Sometimes big, sometimes not so big, sometimes big. Our kids need to know that Dad knows. You know how Dad knows? Because Dad's full of mercy. You know why Dad's full of mercy? Because he understands forgiveness. You know why he understands forgiveness? Because Dad's not perfect. Boy, have they hammered us today on not being perfect? I feel like a hypocrite. Well, I haven't done that right. We're not perfect. We mess up. Our kids need to know Dad knows he messes up. And he understands the cross. See, understanding mercy is hard. It's easy to tell you what to do. I was a few years ago, several years ago. It's been really a long time, but my conscience was killing me. And I thought, Dad's the one person I don't want to talk to. But you know, Dad knew. So we're down at the barn one day, and I got to do it. I got to do it. Somebody stopped me. So I said, hey, I want to talk to you a second. He said, yeah, what's going on? And I told him. I confessed to him. I will not confess to you. And I was pretty ashamed. Very ashamed. Somebody says, was it a big thing or a little thing? Well, it was kind of in the middle. Could be big. I'm not. But he said, I told him all that, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, well, I don't know what he's going to say. And he said, okay, is that all? I said, yeah, that's all. He said, okay, why don't we move on? He never mentioned it to me again. What did he know? I don't know what he knew. I think he knew that nobody's perfect, that he wasn't perfect, and his dad wasn't perfect, and nobody's perfect, no dad. We all mess up. Is that all? Let's move on. A few years later, things really weren't well with me, just to confess to you. I was really down. My wife was down. Things weren't well at home. We had all the kids, and I was very depressed. It's one of those deals that we needed to be picked up. We had bad decisions, honestly. It just was not good at home. He comes over to the house, knocks on the door. When I opened the door, I was going, oh no. Oh no. Well, I deserve it. So we opened the door, just me, him, and Teresa, and I believe Tex Autry was over there. Maybe he was real small. And he said, hey, I want to talk to you a second. Now, he knew. I'm going to lead you to the end of the story. He knew. He said, I want to talk to you a second. I said, okay. He said, pull up a chair. And Teresa pulled up a chair. He said, I'm only going to talk to you about this one time. Very gentle, not stern. He goes, I'm only going to talk to you about this one time. I said, all right. He said, hey. I don't know that. He said, hey, I want him to be in church. And he pointed to my son. He said, I want him to be in the church. That's all he said. He said, you understand? I said, I understand. That's all he said. He said, hey, I'm not talking to y'all again. Y'all are going to be fine. I don't remember what I did that day. I don't remember what I did the next day. But I'll never forget that. You know what that told me? I didn't need a lecture. He knew. He knew because he knew. He understood forgiveness. He understood when we mess up. He understood when we fall. I didn't need a lecture. Our kids need to know that we know they mess up because we've messed up, not because they're the only ones. I think we fail when we do that. Somebody says, why'd you pick that? If you look back behind, it says, ask Dad, he knows. Just if you're wondering. One of my favorite movies. That sign is in that movie several times. Ask Dad, he knows. It's a Wonderful Life. You know, when it's all said and done, I hope our kids trust us. I hope they look at us and we're on their side. Not we're always telling them what to do. And when it's all said and done, and they put us in the ground, and like we do, my mom and dad are gone, we sit around and we talk about mom and dad a lot. We tell stories. We tell stories to the kids that don't remember them that well. Some of these little ones growing up, tell them to my son every chance I get. What you really want when you're dead and gone is that you hope at least somebody, a grandkid, a kid, great-grandkids go, hey, you know what? I think I want to do it like Dad did it. Not because Dad was great, because Dad followed Christ. I think I want to do it like Dad. I think that many times. I've told my wife, things are going on. I say, ooh, I wish I could talk to Daddy. And then she may say, well, what would he say? Well, I say, I know what he would say. Isn't it what you want when we're gone? Your kids to go, I want to do it like him for a whole host of reasons. Thank you.